Hi everybody, Drew Cook here, and this is kind of a weird episode of Biting Cat Stories and Games, a Biting Cat Media presentation. A lot of you probably know me or found me through my blog Gold Machine about 1980s games by a company called Infocom. I also have a blog called Top Expert about learning Inform, programming language for making parser adventure games like the one we're going to look at here in a minute. And I also wrote a game of my own, Repeat the Ending, which some people liked, and that feels pretty good. So a lot of ways to stumble across me, I suppose. But this video, and it's a video, is unusual. As a little backstory, I have an upcoming episode of my podcast where I need to include some audio from an outside application, specifically a game called Vampire the Masquerade Swan Song. And I thought it was kind of a low stakes, improvisational way to kind of explore this tech and make sure everything's working. I could do a little video about one of my favorite games, Zork I, talk about a bit of its history or production context, reception context, as well as maybe talking about how to play parser games in the first place. We talk a lot in the community about the accessibility of parser games and how challenging they are to learn. So I thought this would be a good venue to discuss sort of some key features of gameplay for these games, starting with Zork I. Now, Zork I is undoubtedly the most successful in terms of sales. Well, I say undoubtedly, I can't source it, but my feeling is that it's undoubtedly the most successful parser game, text adventure game from what's called the commercial era, that is the 80s and possibly the early 90s, but really by the early 90s that ship had sailed. So 80s parser text adventure game, Zork I, was the best-selling game by a company called Infocom, which was a wildly successful American company. They weren't necessarily such a big deal outside of the States. They tended to be more expensive and rare. So depending on where you lived, you might not have much of an Infocom background, even if you grew up during the 80s. But in America, everybody knew Zork. It was a household name. It's in the New York Times. It was in other media. So this was a huge pop culture phenomenon at the time. And I think it's hard to understand that now because parser games are such kind of a weird niche thing, and there's no money in them, right? So I think it's hard for people to picture a time when that wouldn't be the case, and especially would be completely opposite the case in terms of business and sales and general interest. But that was a long time ago, and things change. So anyway, Zork I is based on a mainframe adventure game that itself was a response to Adventure or Advent, that classic game, generally considered the first sophisticated parser game. There's been sort of games before Adventure, but in terms of the sort of world model and design sophistication, Adventure is definitely a first in many senses. Zork was a response to that. Zork was written by some people working in a graduate school lab, the dynamic modeling group at MIT, a very prestigious technical university, engineering university in the United States. And it kind of retains that flavor. It's grad students trolling other grad students. The people who played it were also people who had access to mainframe computers, specifically PDP computers, that nobody had in their house really. I mean, there were some kind of weird cases where somebody might have something like a PDP, but these were huge things that were generally limited to larger businesses and university computer departments. So the original reception context for Zork before it became a commercial product was that kind of prankster college thing, and the parser has the narrative voice can sometimes be snarky, and I think it reflects that mood. What stood out, I think, to people at the time was that it had a personality at all. There's a clear narrative voice in Zork that was not so well developed in other text adventure games of the day. Zork I originally shipped in this kind of blister pack, as you can see here. A very bare bones production. You see the price tag here, $40, which was a lot of money in 1980. Some of you probably know. These are called the folio editions. They come for the famous gray box. This has a very bare manual. It doesn't really explain a lot. It's focused on mechanical play, command sets and whatnot. Another fun example of this that I like is the CBM, or Commodore Business Machines versions. These came in a couple different flavors, 4 different flavors. First one, I mean, look at this. This is pretty stark. That's the cover for a little, cardboard or manila type folder, fold out with a disc in the jacket. This is probably actually the label from the disc, if you can believe that. Later they got a little fancier. Let's look at one thing I like about the version 4 is that it's for both English and French audiences. So Quebec province, obviously. We'll scroll in, mind frazzling, and here I'm not going to embarrass myself doing French, but you can see everything's duplicated, English and French. Pretty neat. That includes the manual. The manual or the box, we'll look at both English and French represented here, which was a common practice for Commodore business machines at the time. These are all very different from what would become known as the gray box release, which came out in 1984. And gray box, the quote-unquote iconic gray box, this is it right here. Infocom standardized on this packaging for all of its games, and so this was like a fold-out booklet that contained what's called a browsie that shoppers in store could review while they were, making their decision. The browsie in this case, let's see if we can find it here. Yes. So the interesting feature of the browsie is that in all these games it came with kind of a fun color booklet. Now this didn't exist for the Zork game, so it had to be created out of full cloth. And it's my opinion that a lot of people who just think Zork is a hilarious yuck, 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 joke a minute, joke, 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 are actually remembering this manual. They're not remembering the game itself. The game itself is sometimes pretty dry, a very dry humor, and this is just one thing after another. I don't really care for it because I feel like they tried to completely recontextualize the games with a bunch of stuff that wasn't there in the first place, and I think it is worse. I don't think it really helps it. Now I'm kind of an outlier here. Some people love this stuff, and some people today they make Zork games, kind of fan fiction games, and rather than making a sequel to the games, they make sequels to these silly manuals. And that's their business. People like what they like. That won't be a focus of our discussion here today. Let's see how long we've been going here. It looks like 10 minutes. Wow. So again, my focus is going to be on the folio content, the content in the game itself. It's not really very interested in whatever got cooked up 4 years later. So we're going to focus on the games. Now, we'll launch one of these now. I play, it's actually a tough call. I usually play parser games with what's called an interpreter. It treats game files like a kind of document. So, if you're not a computer person, you're like, what is an interpreter? OMG. You can really just think of it as a document viewer, and the document is the game. Okay, because all these Infocom games are in game files, and so are modern interactive fiction games. So I usually like to play, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right or not, Lectrot, which is by Andrew Plotkin. There are several interpreters. I'm not really going to sell one over the other. The thing right now that I like more than anything else with Lectrot is it automatically keeps track of play transcripts or records of your play, which is great because I forget to make them. So this is an incredible feature. But it was a hard decision because Zork, some of you will know what this means and some of you won't. Zork doesn't support the verb undo, the command undo, which I'm going to zip this text up a little bit. There we go. Let's see how that goes. It doesn't support undo, which is a modern convenience that people now just expect, and rightfully so. So that's tough. There is an interpreter called Frotz, which is great for Infocom games, that actually supports undo at the interpreter level. And I really debated whether to do that or not, but to me the automated transcript plus a kind of more convenient scroll back, the scroll back in Frotz involves opening a separate window, and so I like being able to just mouse wheel up to see what we've read before. That'll make more sense once we've played for a bit. But this is Zork, and just to kind of highlight some key portions of this, if you're new to parser games, you're not sure how they work. At the top we have what's called the status line. Okay, now different authors use the status line in different ways, but a common approach for these older Infocom games is to have this over here on the left, which is the name of the quote-unquote room. Room is kind of a tech term. Like right now, we're not actually inside anything, we're outdoors, but this is called a room. You can call it a location if you want, but this is the name of the place where the player currently is. This is their current score. These old games always had scores, really. I mean, the mystery ones don't, but the more adventure type games always have score. And then the number of turns played. There was an idea back in the old days that it was cool if you could be efficient, and what's the minimum number of turns you could beat a game in. So turn count was something people really paid attention to. It also matters for another reason that we'll get into in just a second. This is what's called the in Inform we call it the banner text, and this is kind of standardized. This is what you always see. You have title, copyright dates, more copyright information, revision number. Now revision number is based on is like a version number, but unlike most software version numbers, there are no decimals. Like you can't have like version 1.1. Everything's a whole number. So revision 88. Serial number, this is actually based on dates, if you can believe that. So this is 1984, right? This is July 26, right? And this is a compile date, as what you're looking at here. Following that is the name of the room. This is, description, and then a thing in the room. Now, before we do anything else on these old games, I type verbose, maximum verbosity, and what that does for us is every time we move into a room, be it the first time or the fifth time, it's going to print this entire description again. That used to be less common on games. It used to be that the default was to only print it once, and then to only print the room name, which is how Zork was, unless you specified otherwise with the verbose command. But let's keep looking here. Here we have what's called the prompt, that has this, greater than symbol. That would be familiar to anybody using computers in the old days. This is a prompt, right? If you're old enough to remember MS-DOS, that's how the prompt starts. It's a familiar visual cue for people of those days to know that they need to type something. One of the things that's key to learning how to play parser games, there's an aspect of reading and there's an aspect of typing. This is kind of a discourse, and it's very unique and specific. This is probably the main thing that beginning players struggle with. So when we're reading, ideally there'll be something descriptive here so we get a sense of place, but there's also going to be something actionable, right? So we are standing west of a White House. That means the White House is to our east, but it has a boarded front door. The front door is boarded, so we can't really go east because the door is boarded, but let's try. Another thing that people struggle with in these games is the use of compass directions for navigation. Text adventure games tend to be sort of on a grid, and so you can think of it in terms of squares that are relative to other squares based on compass directions. So we can try to go east here because we're west of the house, right? And the door is boarded and you can't remove the boards. All right, so that's kind of what we expected, but a good parser game will give you some actionable feedback. So why don't we take a look at the other part of this room, which is the small mailbox, right? Now this is the most common command in a parser game. There are very few exceptions, but generally examine is the most common command in a parser game. So generally your first step in playing one of these games is scanning descriptions for things that you can examine. So let's examine the mailbox. Small mailbox is closed. Now this is prompting us to perform another action, right? If it's closed, one thing we could deduce is that maybe we want to open it. So we'll try to open the mailbox. Once again, we're getting prompted to action. Opening the small mailbox reveals a leaflet. So let's examine it. Welcome to Zork. Zork is a game of adventure, danger, and low cunning. In it you will explore some of the most amazing territory ever seen by mortals. No computer should be without one. As an interesting bit of trivia, in the old mainframe game, version information was tracked in this leaflet. Or no, that's not true. But it talked instead about a self-contained universe and some other items. Version information was actually tracked on a newspaper that was on the doorstep. Another common command is look, which can be abbreviated as L. We can take things that seem useful. We can check what we've taken by checking our inventory, which we can abbreviate with I. Okay, see how that is. If we decide something isn't useful, we can drop it. Now notice here, we're doing two different types of commands here. We're doing commands that, if you remember the old grammar days, reflexive verbs, that is, no noun involved, right? Look, there's no noun to that. It's just a verb. Look. Inventory or I, that's a simple construction. It's one word. Then we have words with, if you remember, direct objects. So drop, leaflet, examine, mailbox. That's another type of command. We always want to kind of be aware of what verbs, that's what this is, drop, right? What verbs accommodate what sort of nouns. And there are cases where actually two nouns, or to go back to our grammar yet again, a direct object and an indirect object. Let's try that real quick and see if we can. We can put leaflet in mailbox. Done, right? So this is a complex construction using a direct and indirect object. It's not very common to use these sentences, but they are important, and they do come up. And I guess the value in understanding all this is that once you get familiar with playing, you'll come to recognize what verbs support what constructions. All right? Looking again. Where can we go? Well, we can't go. Now we type lots of things. East, go east, or E, right? We can abbreviate compass directions because they're so common, all right? Now, where do we go from here? Well, one idea is that we could try to get around the house, right? If we're west of the White House, what if we were east of it? Now, the game doesn't really tell you how to do this. A modern game would tell you explicitly, you need to go north to get to the north side of the house or something. But here, we're just meant to kind of figure that out. And so this is kind of like training. It's not really a puzzle, but it's a way to push someone into getting mastery, right? So if we try to go north, we find ourselves north of the house. You are facing the north side of a white house. There is no door here, and all the windows are boarded up. To the north, a narrow path winds through the trees. Now let's examine the house. The house is a beautiful colonial house which is painted white. It is clear that the owners must have been extremely wealthy. I make a lot of hay out of this in my writing at Gold Machine, that this house is colonial and the idea of wealth and accessing, the great underground empire. To me, the game has a colonial theme, but more on that in a bit. So we're north of the house. Let's try to get east of the house, okay? So type E for east. Behind house. You are behind the White House. A path leads into the forest to the east. In one corner of the house there is a small window which is slightly ajar. Okay. So if we scan this, we see some actionable items, right? What about this window? We'll examine it. It is slightly ajar, but not enough to allow entry. Well, we've already used the open verb. So let's try that again. We'll try to open the window. Now it's important to remember, as we're learning how to do this, one of the things that's kind of hard to grasp is the idea that these games fully support natural language is kind of, well, it's a myth. These don't support, some of these commands can be natural language, but what these games really support is a very specific dialect, this kind of verb noun, and there are only so many verbs that are supported, so you're not going to be able to do things like stand by the window, right? That implies a kind of analog world, where we can position ourselves near anything in the room, and by default that's just really not how things work. We enter these rooms and it's kind of a flat space where we can perform these very specific type of actions against them, right? We can open the window. I can't really lean on the window, right? I can't jostle the window, right? Jostling doesn't work. So a big part of this is figuring out what actions we can perform and learning what we can expect when we perform them, right? So it's actually helpful to get rid of the idea that this is natural language and get into an idea that this is a very specific dialect. This is ultimately a computer program, right? So we can think of this in terms of very specific syntax that we use to interact with this world, and it looks like English, and it sounds like English, but it isn't English in the way that we speak or think, right? It isn't English the way our ideas often emerge from our heads, okay? This is something that is much more narrow and limited than that. And so job one of learning to play these games, it's kind of learning to understand, A, how to read these descriptions for something actionable, and B, what commands work with nouns, what commands don't work with nouns, and that all takes practice. It isn't really a simple matter of just, oh, well, I got some English stuff and I'll just type it in. And because that's one of the things that drives new players crazy, is this has a facade of kind of intuitive, ease that just isn't real. And so you're much better off thinking about this as learning a kind of jargon, a kind of dialect, all right? So we've opened, but, let's move on. We've opened the window. Let's look again, just jog our memory. It's smart enough. This is called the world model, in that it remembers what's happened and what you've done, but also anything else that's happened in the game. But it remembers that we opened the window, small window, which is open. So now we can go inside, right? Let's go inside. Kitchen. You are in the kitchen of the White House. A table seems to have been recently used for the preparation of food. A passage leads to the west, and a dark staircase can be seen leading upward. A dark chimney leads down, and to the east is a small window which is open. On the table is an elongated brown sack, smelling of hot peppers. All right, there's a lot here, right? There's a lot here to think about. A bottle is sitting on the table. The glass bottle contains a quantity of water. All right, so a lot to do and fiddle with. The dark things, those aren't really a clue for what might happen. But let's do another important function for these older games, which is saving our game. If you're a modern player, you're used to some pretty considerate games that just save your play as you go along, track your progress as you go along. And that's not what happens here. For I don't know, a few reasons. Some modern games do that, but these old games didn't. One reason they didn't is because everybody just expected to have to save their games. In fact, it was a luxury to be able to save your games. This is a mark of sophistication that you can save. So expectations were very different. There's also the fact that most systems, maybe all systems, had to repeatedly load content from the diskette in and out of memory, and there were no guarantees as far as what space would be available on the disk for saves. So as a system-wide or game-wide feature, it would be impossible to account for every different system and amount of save data needed, et cetera, et cetera. So that was never in the cards, and it was probably never considered, just because people were happy enough saving their own games. But we're going to save our game, right? So I'm going to type start here. And the reason I'm saving, you need to understand, playing these old games was that, keep checking my time. One reason was that it was very easy in those days to die, to get a game over screen. And again, people used to contemporary games are used to having some sort of fallback where you die and it's just like, oh yeah, would you like to go back to this or that? There's nothing like this in Zork. If you haven't saved your game, you're just done. You're hosed. The other reason is that it's very easy to render your game unwinnable. Now this is something, again, modern players, it just blows their minds that this could happen, but it's true. In those days, you could perform actions that would ruin your game and give you no path to beating it. You could most commonly waste or lose items that were critical for finishing the game. But there were lots of other ways too. Some of them completely unexpected. Sometimes it would happen and you didn't even know your game was unwinnable, which is not a fashionable practice today. If you played my repeat the ending, I kind of joke around with that a bit by having game over like 33 times. But the player can keep going, and in fact they should. But in those days, this was all just kind of considered par for the course, And I think that goes back to a couple things. The one thing, there were no conventions. There were no craft conventions for making this type of game. Despite there being other text adventures around, Zork's only real predecessor was adventure. I don't think there's a big influence, for instance, from the Scott Adams games. I don't think that was a big consideration for making Zork. So they just kind of did whatever they felt, and a big part of it goes back to that idea of sort of trolling the computer lab at this other institution. All right, this kind of prankster ethos or mindset that we find pretty unrelatable today as people interested in computer games. Note, I consider computer games a pretty flat space. Like, I know a lot of people are like, interactive fiction is different, blah, blah, but to me it's not really different. Interactive fiction of the 80s, parser games of the 80s, and RPGs were really the first models for narrative games or story games, and their influence can still be felt today. I think probably everybody making games in the 90s played Zork. We know that even Japanese designers played Zork. We had multiple ports. We had a PC 98 port of Zork, as well as a PlayStation port, and Planetfall 2 got a PC 98. So, the reach of these games is, I think, further than people recognize because they focus on interfaces. And of course, game design is not the same as interface. Interface and design have to work together. But my work at Gold Machine, where I write about these Infocom games, I don't really talk at all about interface because that's not where the legacy is to me. That's not the canonicity of it. It's important, but it's not everything. Anyway, as I've said, people playing today just would find the idea of an unwinnable game shocking. Imagine if you were playing Baldur's Gate 3 and you got to a point where it just was completely, utterly impossible to win. Now, I'm not saying, some people are not very smart about their saves, and they only have one save, and they saved with a fight they're not prepared for, and it just seems like they're kind of hosed. Yes, that happens, but that is not a game that is completely impossible to win. This is something where no matter what you do, no matter how lucky you get, no matter, you're not going to find a new strategy, it's just unwinnable. And that's fairly common in these old Infocom games, and there wasn't a lot of resistance to it. And people have analyzed why that is and how that could be. And part of it is just, I think people were just resigned to things being like that. You've heard the expression Nintendo hard. It was very easy to just lose everything in Mega Man, and nobody really thought anything about it. That's just kind of how those games were. Computer games, video games, just things where you died again and again and had to try again and again, and people accepted that. And so it really wasn't as strange or as big an outlier as it seems to us today as modern players. But the key point is, you really need to be saving a lot if you play these old games, because the game is not going to consider your progress or be sympathetic to what you haven't accomplished. All right, so the old saying, save early, save often, definitely applies to these games. I should also note now that this is going to be a spoiler type playthrough. I know so many people who are curious about Zork, but they're never going to play it. For one thing, there's just so much new IF coming out all the time. Nobody really. It's a very unusual person who makes time to play these games, and that's perfectly understandable. So, this video is a way that those people can get a feel for what this is like, and the experience of play. So, just because we saved, show you how easy it is to make the game unwinnable. Let's open this sack. See here, the elongated brown sack. And we'll eat the garlic. Now, you can't win the game now because you need the garlic later, right? Now, this is kind of, it makes it seem like it's sort of a stupid idea, but it doesn't tell you you're hosed, but you are completely hosed. So we're going to load our game, which we do with restore, and we're back, and we haven't eaten the garlic. Let's open the sack, though. As I said before, the main mechanic of all of these games is examining things. So let's examine the lunch, There's nothing special about the lunch. Boy, that's pretty boring. Examine garlic. There's nothing special about a clove of garlic. Let's see if we can be 3 for 3. Let's examine the bottle. The quantity of water. Let's examine the chimney. I'm just going through everything. It leads downward and looks climbable. Let's try going down the chimney. Only Santa Claus climbs down chimneys. This is an example of the kind of personality that Zork had that kind of set it apart from a lot of other games. Just these kind of dry quips. Although you'll notice it's not just one Framboz Duncan Fram after another like the Gray Box Browsy is. You know, we actually haven't encountered a lot of that. Let's try going up the stairs. This is a very iconic line. People who've never played these games typically know the word grue. It is pitch black. You are likely to be eaten by a grue. Now we just saved, so let's go ahead and get eaten by a grue. Oh no, you have walked into the slavering fangs of a lurking grue. You have died. This is another kind of troll. You can't win if you die because you need to have a full, all your score, and you lose points when you die. So we have once again made the game unwinnable, and it doesn't tell you that either. So let's restore our game once again. Now we can scroll back up. So the thing about the grue is we could go up the stairs and like just stand there and nothing bad would happen. But the moment we try to move in a direction that isn't back toward the light, we get eaten. Like we could, if we go back down, well, let's see. Let's try to go back down, okay? Yeah. So the only direction you can safely go when you go into a dark area is back the way you came. So the grue is a way to kind of gate off territory, and the only way you can enter and interact in an area is if there's light there. Now this whole area is lit. It's above ground. We don't need any light source. If we go over here to living room, you are in a living room. There is a doorway to the east, a wooden door with strange Gothic lettering to the west, which appears to be nailed shut, a trophy case, and a large oriental rug in the center of the room. Above the trophy case hangs an elvish sword of great antiquity. A battery-powered brass lantern is on the trophy case. All right, a lot to look at here. Let's kind of go in order. Let's start with the door. We get to read the engravings, translate to this space intentionally left blank. So that's another joke, which appears to be nailed shut. A trophy case. Let's examine the case. Trophy case is empty. Another lush description. Let's examine the rug. There's nothing special about it. Let's examine the sword. There's nothing special about it. Let's examine the lantern. So let's get, the iconic line is get lamp. Yes. We also could have done take lamp. We could also probably do pick up sword. Yeah. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. People tend to either get or take. Get has fewer letters. Let's do our inventory again. Now you can actually type in take inventory if you want. Oh, it doesn't work. It works in later games. We could type in inventory. and it would, it always lists what you're carrying, but we're gonna just do I from, that's just how we're gonna do things. You know, it's common in modern games that you can examine yourself, but here's another joke. That's difficult unless your eyes are prehensile. Know that there's kind of a smirk to this. That's kind of the Infocom house voice, where it's kind of sardonic, dry sort of wit. It became quite popular or memorable. Nowadays, things have changed a lot, and people are not really interested in snarky adventure game narrators. My game, Repeat the Ending, narrator can get pretty snarky, but there's reasons for that. It's not really, I'm not going to explicate my game, but I guess the point is that exceptions remain acceptable to players as long as there's an in-game rationale for it. But just kind of coming out of the blue, saying like, "Hey, stupid," people don't really buy anymore. So we have our sword, we have our lantern. Just kind of some background. In Adventure, there was a room where you dropped your treasures. Adventure didn't support multiple nouns in a command, so you couldn't say put treasure in case, or something like that. All you could do is drop treasure. So this is a way in which Zork is more sophisticated. It has a trophy case where you can get your treasures and put them in there. And at this time, people would have expected a treasure hunt. And the manual that came with Zork actually says that that's your goal, is to get the 20 treasures of Zork and put them in the trophy case. So that's explicitly stated in the manual. It's not said anywhere in the game. I wouldn't call that copy protection necessarily, but this was a time when people read manuals. People don't really read manuals anymore, or don't want to read manuals. But in those days, it was kind of a ritual to buy the game, go home, and then read the manual cover to cover, and then start playing. I mean, that's what I usually did, and loved it. Anyway, the big interesting item here, believe it or not, is the large oriental rug in the center of the room. You try to touch it, that's another action. Fiddling with the carpet isn't notably helpful. Try to smell it. Smells like a carpet. Not really getting anywhere with this, right? Let's talk about a new action we haven't really tried yet, which is move carpet. With a great effort, the rug is moved to one side of the room, revealing the dusty cover of a closed trap door. Okay. You can also say, I don't think it'll let me. Yeah. It also accepted roll up rug at the time. Another thing that made Infocom games appear and so sophisticated was support for synonyms. And we've already seen how we've used multiple synonyms. Roll up and move being very different constructions. But again, to be clear, notice how everything is like, most of these commands are like a matched binary. You have the action, and you have a noun where the action is appropriate, right? And that's part of learning this, like move carpet. If we try to move other things, like move the case, you can't move the trophy case, right? So, we have this limited set of verbs, and then we have kind of nouns that are appropriate and nouns that aren't appropriate. But it's very useful when you're approaching these games or learning them for the first time that you're ultimately dealing with a fairly limited possibility set. every action is only going to really be productive for a set number of nouns, right, at a time. And so part of playing these games and beating them is kind of considering what's been attempted and what hasn't. And that's an exhaustible list. Now, it can be kind of exhausting to exhaust that list, but it's an exhaustible list. We're going to use another familiar command at this point, and we're about to stop. I want to keep these at just under an hour, and yeah, we're at 50, so not much longer. One thing you can note is that if you input an action or a verb that requires a noun, Infocom's parser is smart enough to ask you some questions or try to clarify what you're up to. So let's just say we're opening the trap door, right? Opens into darkness. Now let's save again. I'm just going to override our other save. You want to be careful overriding saves because you never know when you're going to need to go back, but I think this is probably fine.
Playing from Lux.
So let's go down. So we have some interesting things going on here. We're in the dark, so we got to look out for the grue stuff. The trapdoor crashes shut, and you hear something barring it. That's mysterious, isn't it? It is pitch black. You are likely to be eaten by a grue. Your sword is glowing with a faint blue glow. People familiar with Tolkien will recognize the blue glow of a weapon when an enemy is near. The weapons of old all did that, and our sword is of great antiquity, so it's doing that too. Just as kind of a general statement, most of the implementers, that is designers, authors of Zork, mainframe Zork, and certainly Mark Blank and Dave Lebling, the people who worked on the commercial Zork 1 together. Lebling was the one kind of into fantasy, Blank was more into science fiction. So this stuff is all Lebling, this blue glow and some of the combat that's coming here in a second. So just something to bear in mind. Now remember, when you get in a situation, the first thing you want to do is check your inventory with I, right? Is there anything we have that can help us? Well, we have a lantern, right? So we can hopefully get rid of this darkness with turn on. We could also say turn on lamp, right? Synonyms. Brass lantern is now on, so we're not going to get eaten by a grue now if we move. Cellar. You are in a dark and damp cellar with a narrow passageway leading north and a crawlway to the south. On the west is the bottom of a steel metal ramp, which is unclimbable. Okay, so I think that's probably enough for this session. Yeah, this is a good stopping place. But just to reiterate, or just continue what we've been saying, we once again have a room description, we have actionable things. Directions are actionable, right? Those are places we can explore. We also have this steep metal ramp, which is kind of intriguing, so we'll look at that next time, see what it's about. But the key takeaway, I think, besides the general history of Zork that I've been talking about, is just one more time, the essence of playing parser games is 1, reading descriptions to determine what is actionable, and 2, entering commands that acts upon those things, right? Whether it's moving to another room, whether it's taking something or examining something, this is a back and forth. We're reading to find actionable things, and then we're acting upon those things. And that's the kind of transactional nature of parser games. All right? Well, I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope quality-wise this works out because, as I said, I need this tech for a podcast coming up. So doing double duty here, but I guess top of the list is I hope this has been interesting or fun to somebody. All right? If there's interest, I'll do more of this. I could even play the whole game, depending on how people feel. But that's it for right now. Thanks to everybody for checking this out.